Is there an opportunity for questions from the audience?
I've got a chance to ask just a couple of questions, and I'm going to have to just choose a few people very quickly. You certainly can ask, just because we've got limited time, could people make their questions very quick?
Yep. Okay. I suppose I've been an atheist since as a young teenager. I was taken to see the newsreels of the liberations of the concentration camps in Europe, and how anybody believed there's a God, a Christian God anyway, after seeing that in the middle of Christian Europe. But I agree with you, the worry here in Australia is the influence of the religious right in the major political parties. That was demonstrated in the struggle to get RU 486 through the Parliament. You may remember the Howard government had no intention of introducing it. It came through the Senate. The women in the Senate combined to go the other way. The religious right did everything to stop it. No,
sorry, I missed what you said.
No, the struggle to get RU 486.
Oh,
you know,
yes.
the after.
Yeah.
The night bill, whatever it's called, sort of thing, through the Parliament. As you know, the Howard government had no intention of doing it, and I won't mention any names, others did their best to stop it. It was the Senate, the women in the Senate who introduced it. Now my question is, the Howard government introduced this $20,000 a year subsidy, was it, for chaplains in the schools? Now this is surely a breach of church and state. Why weren't the atheists active in, well, at least challenging this in the High Court or something? That would be illegal in America, as you know.
It would be illegal in America, probably, but Section 116 of the Australian Constitution, which provides that there will be no establishment of a religion, or however exactly it's phrased, that section of the Constitution has been taken up to the High Court in the Defence of Government Schools case, among other cases. But in that major case in the High Court, it was interpreted very narrowly, very differently from the way the equivalent provision, the Establishment Clause in the First Amendment to the American Constitution, has been interpreted in America. So anyone who thinks that they will go up to the High Court at the moment is a bit on a hiding to nothing. You know, the strong precedent there is you're probably going to lose a case about funding religion from the federal government, and you're going to have to be prepared to try to overturn your strong precedent at enormous expense. That's not to say there's been no campaigning about that, by the way. There has been campaigning against it. But taking a High Court case would be a very, you probably would be on a hiding to nothing if you took it to the High Court, if you challenged it that way. In America, it would be a very different thing.
Can I ask Anthony what he thinks of that? How much secular government should fund religious groups, religious schools?
Well, I think as a matter of principle, of course, they shouldn't, but I'm not really competent to speak on the Australian situation. In the United Kingdom, quite a lot of our tax money goes to faith-based schools because traditionally there would be Church of England schools, then Roman Catholic schools, and then in the last 10, 15 years or so, because of the increase in the number of members of the immigrant communities, they've started with the well-intentioned idea of being inclusive and the rest, to give funding to Muslim schools, and Jewish schools, and Sikh schools, and Hindu schools. And those of us who've been campaigning against the idea of faith-based schools altogether have been saying to the government, look, we've got a brilliant example of how well faith-based schooling works. I can tell it to you in 2 words. It's called Northern Ireland.
It seems more like balkanisation of society than unity of society.
I see hands, and I'm just going to give one over here.
It always seems to me that atheists are pitted against religion and have nothing to celebrate. So I'd like to ask, do you think we should have a holiday where you have a mythical creature character bringing gifts? And if so, what should it be as a celebration?
I think it should be book buying day.
Wasn't there a case with the Flying Spaghetti Monster came into being?
Oh, the Flying Spaghetti Monster.
And the Pirates of Church Elders and International 12 Like a Pirate Day.
Yes, what if you've been touched by his noodly appendage?
It's 19
celebrate that.
But I have to tell you, you've heard of Auguste Comte, of course, who started the Church of Positivism, which didn't have any God, and it worshipped nature, and it had meetings on Sundays and sermons and everything else. And of course it fizzled out, because if you try to do anything which mimics what the religions do, you're going to make a mistake. I think what you ought to do instead is to regain for the life of sanity and good sense the belief that our ethical lives and our aesthetic lives will give us all the nourishment that we require emotionally and all the fraternity which bolsters that nourishment, by recognising that walking in the country or going to an art exhibition or listening to music or having tea with friends is what Ignatius Loyola would recognise as a spiritual exercise. These are things that really speak to the spirit of human beings. You know, if you have companionship and friendship in life and things that are worth doing, you don't go hunting after noodly appendages or anything else.
Just as there's no proof that God exists, there's also no proof God doesn't exist.
You need to read Carl Sagan.
Wouldn't you say it's intellectually more sound to be an agnostic?
This can get us into semantics, of course. What's an atheist, what's an agnostic, and so on. But look, if somebody comes to you and says, you know, they believe in the flying spaghetti monster, well, you might say they can't prove the existence of the flying spaghetti monster, but can you prove the non-existence of the flying spaghetti monster? Can you prove the non-existence of Zeus? Can you prove the non-existence of Thor or Odin? Can you prove the non-existence of, you know, the great Juju over the mountain? You can't disprove any of those things. Someone who's determined to hold on to those things can do so. You can always do that. I don't see any more reason to believe in, you know, the God of the Old Testament than to believe in those things. And I actually think there are some positive reasons not to as well, because God is just not just one other thing in the universe that might be hiding in a galaxy far away. You know, God has certain characteristics. Now, the Christian God does, the God of Orthodox Abrahamic theology does. And it's hard to reconcile those characteristics attributed to that God with the world that we actually live in.
So I have to say that I think that the agnostic position is not a rational position to hold. And I think that because the debate here is not a debate about what one knows and what one can prove. And one knows that there is no God or knows that there are no fairies at the bottom of the garden. It's much more a question about rationality. Let me just remind you first that the word rational means ratio, that is the proportion of evidence and grounds you have for a certain commitment or belief, and that commitment. And the best example I can give you is this. If you've ever got wet because you've been in the rain without an umbrella, and you then thought to yourself, the next time it's raining and you look out of the window just before you go out, well, I've read David Hume, so this is an inductive thing. If I go out in the rain, it's probable that I'll get wet, but I might not. Because all the past times I've got wet, no guarantee I'll get wet next time. So I won't bother to take my umbrella. Now, if anybody overheard this train of thought, it can't be called a train of reasoning, they would think that you were irrational. And you would think that if somebody said to you quite seriously that they thought the fairies lived at the bottom of their garden and were painting the flowers red and blue and green, or that there is a flying spaghetti monster or a teapot circling the sun or anything else, you would regard them as irrational. And you think about the nature of rational belief. Rational belief is very like gambling. If I said to you, there is an extremely small probability that this horse will even start the race, let alone win it, so put your money on it, you would say, no, thank you very much. If I said, there's a close to 1 probability that if you jump off this high building you're going to hurt yourself, then you might think that a good reason for not doing it. In other words, they would be tantamount to knowing that the horse is not going to win and knowing that you will hurt yourself if you jump off the building. And in fact, that is what we mean when we talk about knowing that there is no God, as there is no fairy, or as there is no flying spaghetti monster. It's because it is irrational to believe it.
It's not about some sort of mathematics. Where's the evidence? Where's the evidence?
Yeah, beautiful.
We are out of time. I am sorry it was so brief, but I think you'll agree it was a treat to hear both these authors speak tonight. Thanks very much. The authors